We paid for our daughter's wedding. Then she banned us because we weren't good enough. So we taught her a lesson she'll never forget. My wife and I were beyond excited when our daughter got engaged. She had always dreamed of a beautiful wedding, and even though it would be expensive, we happily offered to pay for everything. Venue, covered, catering, handled, dress, flowers, photographer, all on us. We thought we were giving her the best day of her life. But a few weeks before the wedding, we got a call that changed everything. Mom, Dad, I love you, but I think it's best if you don't come to the wedding. We were stunned. What? Why? Her excuse? You just don't fit the vibe. We weren't good enough. She had no problem taking our money, but she didn't want us. She thought we'd just accept it and move on. But if she thought she could cut us out and still walk down the aisle on our dime, she was in for a rude awakening. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. For years, my wife and I had dreamed about our daughter's wedding day. We had always told her that when the time came, we would do everything in our power to give her the wedding of her dreams. And when she got engaged, we followed through on that promise. We weren't wealthy, but we had saved enough over the years to cover a beautiful wedding. We told her not to worry about the cost, that we would take care of everything so she and her fiancé could just focus on enjoying their big day. We paid for the venue, the catering, the dress, the flowers, the photographer. Everything. We wanted to make sure she had the perfect wedding, and then she stabbed us in the back. A few weeks before the wedding, we got a call from her. At first, I thought it was just another check-in, maybe a last-minute detail she needed help with. But her tone, it was different. Mom, Dad, I love you, but I think it's best if you don't come to the wedding. I nearly dropped the phone. What? My wife asked, her voice shaking. What are you talking about? Our daughter hesitated, then sighed. It's just, the wedding has a certain vibe, and I don't think you guys really fit in with the crowd. I was speechless. What do you mean we don't fit in? We paid for this entire wedding. I know, and I appreciate it, she said quickly. But my in-laws have a different social circle. They're very sophisticated, and I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. After paying for everything, after making sure she had the perfect day, we weren't good enough to be there. She had no problem taking our money, but she didn't want us. That's when I made my decision. If she thought she could cut us out and still walk down the aisle on our dime, she was in for a rude awakening. I stood there, gripping my phone, trying to process what my daughter had just said. You don't fit the vibe. She had no problem taking tens of thousands of dollars from us. No issue letting us handle every expense, every detail, every single part of making her dream wedding happen. But when it came time for the actual day, we weren't good enough to be there. My wife sat beside me, pale, her hands shaking. I don't understand, she whispered. She's our daughter. How could she do this to us? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Let me get this straight, I said into the phone. You're telling us, the people who have paid for this entire wedding, that we are not invited? She sighed, as if we were being the difficult ones. Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. You guys wouldn't understand the people who are coming. It's a different crowd. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Like we were embarrassments. Like we were beneath the people at her wedding. My wife covered her mouth, trying to hold back tears. That's when I snapped. Okay, I said, my voice cold. If we're not invited, then neither is our money. There was a pause. Wait, what? She asked, her voice suddenly a lot less confident. You heard me, I said. If we're not welcome at the wedding, then our money isn't either. Figure out how to pay for it yourself. The panic in her voice was immediate. Dad, you can't do that. Everything's already booked. I smiled coldly. Oh, I absolutely can, and I will. But, no buts, I interrupted. You made it clear that we don't belong there, so why should we pay for something we're not allowed to be a part of? Silence. Then she snapped, You can't do this to me. Everything will be ruined. That's not my problem, I said. Good luck. And then, I hung up. If she thought she could use us for our money and then toss us aside like we were nothing, She was about to learn a very painful lesson. The moment I hung up, my wife and I just sat there, staring at each other in shock. Our own daughter had just thrown us away like we were nothing. After everything we had done for her, after paying for every single part of her wedding, she had the audacity to tell us we weren't the right vibe for her big day. Not because we had done anything wrong, not because we had disrespected her or her fiancé, but because we weren't good enough for the fancy people she wanted to impress. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I started making calls. One by one, I canceled every single thing we had paid for. The venue, gone. The catering, refund requested. The florist, the photographer, the live band, all canceled. By the time the sun came up, the entire wedding was falling apart at the seams. At around 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was my daughter. I took a deep breath and answered, keeping my voice calm. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" she snapped. "The venue just called and said the booking was canceled." "That's right," I said, barely suppressing my satisfaction. "What do you mean that's right? You can't just cancel everything. The wedding is in 2 weeks." I smiled coldly. "Oh, I absolutely can. You made it clear that we weren't welcome at your wedding. So, why should we pay for it?" Her voice rose into full panic. "Dad, be serious. You're ruining everything." "No, sweetheart. You ruined everything. The moment you told us we weren't good enough to be there." She screamed in frustration. "Do you know how embarrassing this is? People are expecting a huge wedding. The venue was non-refundable. The catering. Dad, you're making a huge mistake." I laughed bitterly. "A mistake? You mean like the one where I spent tens of thousands of dollars on a wedding I wasn't even invited to? Yeah, I think I'm done making mistakes." "Mom?" she suddenly blurted, desperate now. "Mom, please talk to him." My wife took the phone, her voice cold. "You heard us, sweetheart. You took everything we gave you and threw us away like garbage. This is what happens when you treat people like that." And then she hung up. We sat there for a moment, the house eerily quiet. Then my wife looked at me and said, "That felt good." And honestly, it really, really did. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, my phone was blowing up. My daughter called again, then her fiancé, then members of his family, then even some of our own relatives. The messages, all the same. "You're overreacting. How could you do this to your own daughter? You're ruining the most important day of her life." I ignored most of them, but when my brother called, I finally picked up. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked the second I answered. I leaned back in my chair, completely calm. "Oh, just correcting a mistake." "A mistake?" he scoffed. "You're humiliating her. People are expecting a wedding." "And we were expecting to be treated like parents, not like an ATM. Funny how that works." He sputtered, trying to come up with some excuse, some way to spin it in my daughter's favor. But he couldn't, because everyone knew the truth. She had no problem taking our money. She just didn't want us. And now, she had neither. By the end of the day, my daughter finally broke. She showed up at our house furious. "You ruined everything," she screamed the moment we opened the door. "Everything is gone. The venue, the catering. How could you do this to me?" I crossed my arms. "How could we do this to you? How could you do this to us?" She threw her hands up. "Oh my God, I just didn't want you guys to feel uncomfortable. I was trying to do you a favor," I scoffed. "A favor? By uninviting us to the wedding we paid for?" "You wouldn't have fit in," she snapped. I took a slow, deep breath. "Then find someone else to pay for it." Her face fell. For the first time, I saw something new in her eyes. Fear. "I can't," she admitted quietly. "We don't have the money," I nodded. "That's not my problem." And then I shut the door in her face. She thought we'd cave. She thought we'd bend over backwards like we always had. But this time, she was on her own. And now, she had to live with the consequences of her actions. For the first time in her life, my daughter had to face real consequences. No more being bailed out. No more relying on us to fix everything. She had taken everything we gave her and thrown us away like we were nothing. Now, she had to figure it out on her own. Over the next few days, she tried everything to salvage the wedding. She called vendors, begged them to reinstate contracts, and even asked her fiancé's family for financial help. But it didn't work. The deposits were gone, the vendors had moved on to other clients, and her fiancé's family? They weren't about to foot the bill. Word spread fast. Friends and extended family started hearing about what happened. Some of them reached out telling us we were being too harsh. "She's your daughter," one relative texted. "You should still be there for her, no matter what." I stared at the message for a long time before finally replying. We were there for her. We paid for everything. She was the one who decided we weren't good enough. She made her choice. Now she can live with it. I never heard back. My wife, who had spent weeks picking out flower arrangements, designing invitations, and coordinating with caterers, was done. I could see the pain in her eyes, but also the relief. "I spent so much time thinking about what she wanted," she admitted one night. "But when did she ever think about us?" That was the moment I knew. We had done the right thing. Then, 3 days before the wedding was supposed to happen, my daughter called again. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the best of me. Her voice was different, not angry, not demanding, just broken. "Dad," she started, her voice shaking. "It's all gone. The wedding is ruined. I don't know what to do." I let out a slow breath. "That's not my problem," she sniffled. "I messed up." I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. "Yes, you did." "I was stupid," she continued. "I was trying to impress people who don't even matter. I don't know what I thought." I stayed silent, waiting. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I should have just wanted my family there." Finally, she understood. But was it too late? I sat there, gripping the phone, listening to my daughter's voice shake as she finally admitted she had made a mistake. It should have felt like a victory, but instead, all I felt was tired. For weeks we had poured our time, money, and energy into making sure she had the perfect wedding. We gave her everything, and she still tossed us aside like we didn't matter. And now that everything had fallen apart, now that she had no venue, no catering, no photographer, and no one willing to fix it for her, now she realized she needed us. I took a slow breath. "What do you want me to do, sweetheart?" She sniffled. "I don't know. I don't want my wedding to be a disaster. I don't know how to fix it." I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. This was the moment. The moment I could have said, "We'll take care of it." The moment I could have swept in like before, throwing money at the problem, cleaning up her mess, making everything go back to the way it was. But this time, I wasn't going to save her. "You made your choice," I said finally. "You wanted a wedding without us. Now you have one." She inhaled sharply. "Dad, please, No," I cut her off. "You had every opportunity to treat us with respect. You had every opportunity to include us. But you didn't want us there. You thought we weren't good enough." "I was wrong," she whispered. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yes, you were. And now, you get to live with that." Silence. Then she said the words I had been waiting for. "I'm sorry." Not defensive, not manipulative, just a real, broken apology. For the first time since this all started, she wasn't trying to fix the wedding. She wasn't trying to convince me to undo what I had done. She was just owning up to it. "I don't expect you to fix this," she admitted. I needed to tell you that I was wrong, and I'm so sorry." I exhaled slowly, finally. "I appreciate that," I said. "Does this mean you'll come?" she asked hesitantly. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "We'll see. Because some lessons, they need to stick." The night after our conversation, I sat with my wife, replaying everything in my head. Our daughter had finally admitted she was wrong. But was that enough? Was an apology, after weeks of entitlement and betrayal, really all it took to erase everything she had done? "Do you believe her?" my wife asked, staring at me over her cup of tea. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I don't know. I want to. But I can't just forget how she treated us." My wife nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "She doesn't just get to say sorry and have everything magically fixed. Actions have consequences. She learned that when we canceled the wedding. But what now? Do we let her suffer, or do we show her some grace?" I knew what she meant. There's a difference between teaching a lesson and cutting someone out completely. Did I really want to hold on to this anger forever? Did I want to let my daughter start her marriage without us there, even after she admitted her mistake? That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I texted her, "Meet us for lunch, just you." She responded immediately. Okay, thank you. At noon, we met at a quiet restaurant. She was already there, sitting at a table, fidgeting with her napkin. She looked different. Not the smug, entitled woman who had uninvited us from her wedding. Just a daughter who knew she had broken something and wasn't sure if she could fix it. Thank you for coming, she said as soon as we sat down. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. You wanted to talk, so talk. She took a shaky breath. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I don't even expect you to come to the wedding, but I need you to know that I hate what I did. I hate how I treated you. I got caught up in trying to impress people who don't even matter, and I threw away the people who do. You didn't deserve that. For the first time, I truly believed her. My wife reached over and took my hand, giving me a silent message. The wedding is in 2 days, my daughter continued. It won't be anything like what I originally planned. We lost everything. But it would mean the world to me if you came. I leaned forward, studying her face. Tell me one thing, I said. If we hadn't canceled everything, would you have ever realized what you did? She swallowed hard, shaking her head. Probably not. And that makes me feel even worse. I let out a slow breath. This was her lesson. And she had finally learned it. We'll think about it, I said. And for the first time since this all started, I meant it. The night before the wedding, my wife and I sat in silence, both of us lost in thought. My daughter had finally apologized, finally owned up to her mistakes. But was it enough? Were we truly ready to just move on and show up to support her after everything she had done? I think she really gets it now, my wife said softly, staring down at her hands. Yeah, I admitted. But does that mean we just forget how much she hurt us? My wife sighed. I don't think we should forget, but I do think we should decide whether this is something we want to carry for the rest of our lives. Are we willing to miss one of the biggest moments in our daughter's life because of a mistake she regrets? I hated how much sense she made. We had every right to never forgive her. We had every right to let her feel the weight of her actions for years. But at the same time, what would that accomplish? She had already lost her dream wedding. She had already learned that actions have consequences. She had already faced the humiliation of watching everything fall apart. She had lost enough. And maybe, just maybe, we had made our point. I exhaled heavily and nodded. We'll go. The next morning, we dressed in simple, formal clothes. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy. This wasn't the grand wedding she had planned. The elegant venue, gone. The expensive catering, gone. What was left was a modest ceremony in a small rented space with a handful of guests who had stuck by her. The only people who truly mattered. When we arrived, my daughter saw us and froze. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. She rushed over, stopping just a few steps away, almost like she was afraid to believe we were really there. You came, she whispered. I nodded. You learned your lesson? That's all we ever wanted. Her lower lip trembled, and she took a deep breath, blinking rapidly. Thank you. For the first time in months, I pulled my daughter into a hug. She clung to me like she never wanted to let go, and at that moment, I knew we had made the right choice. She wasn't the same person who had uninvited us from her wedding. She had changed. And now, we could start rebuilding. The ceremony was simple, nothing like the extravagant event my daughter had originally envisioned, but there was something beautifully real about it. Gone were the fancy decorations, the overpriced floral arrangements, and the distant high society guests she had tried so hard to impress. Instead, what remained were the people who truly cared about her. As I sat next to my wife, watching my daughter exchange vows, I realized that this was probably the best outcome she could have ever asked for. Had the wedding gone as originally planned, she might have been too caught up in the illusion of status, of impressing people who didn't matter, to appreciate the importance of the moment. Now, stripped of all the pretenses and materialism, she was left with something far more valuable: love, family, and a fresh start. After the ceremony, guests gathered in a small reception area. The food was simple, the decorations minimal, but the atmosphere, it was genuine. People were laughing, hugging, talking, not just making small talk for the sake of appearances. For the first time in this entire process, my daughter seemed happy. Not because of what she had, but because of who she had. At one point, She approached me and my wife, looking nervous. I don't deserve to ask this, but can I get a dance? My wife smiled warmly and nudged me forward. Go on. I took my daughter's hand and led her to the dance floor, and as we swayed to the soft music, she let out a deep breath. I thought my wedding was ruined, but now I think it's better this way. I looked at her, my expression serious. And why's that? She swallowed hard, her voice almost breaking. Because now I know what matters, and I almost lost it. For the first time, I saw the daughter we had raised, not the entitled woman who had turned her back on us, but the girl who had once clung to me after scraping her knee, who had laughed in the kitchen while baking with her mom, who had always known deep down what family was supposed to mean. I don't deserve you guys, she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I squeezed her hand. No, you didn't, but you learned, and that's enough. She blinked rapidly, nodding. I'll never forget this. I swear. At that moment, I finally believed her. As the night wound down, I watched my daughter move through the small reception, laughing, hugging guests, and looking truly happy. Not because of some grand expensive event, not because of status or impressing the right people, but because she was surrounded by the people who actually cared about her. At one point, she sat next to me, her face still carrying the traces of emotion from our earlier dance. She glanced around the room and then back at me, her expression serious. I keep thinking about how different today would have been if you hadn't pulled the plug on everything. I raised an eyebrow. And she let out a small breath, looking down at her hands. And I think I would have regretted it, not right away, but later. If everything had gone as planned, I would have been too distracted, too caught up in trying to impress people who wouldn't have even cared about me a week later. But this is real, and I almost threw it away. I studied her face for a long moment. And what did you learn? She smiled sadly. That money can buy a big wedding, but it can't buy the people who actually love you. That if you take advantage of the people who support you, you might lose them forever. And that no amount of luxury means anything if the people who raised you aren't there to see it. I leaned back in my chair, nodding. Then I guess we did our job. She sniffled, wiped at her eyes, and smiled. Yeah, I guess you did. As the reception ended, my wife and I hugged her one last time before heading home. I knew things wouldn't be perfect overnight. She had broken something in our relationship that would take time to rebuild. But tonight, she had taken the first real step toward earning that trust back. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed she had learned her lesson. Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that change us the most. My daughter thought she could cut us out while still benefiting from everything we gave her. She learned that wasn't how life works. Now, let me ask you, have you ever had to teach someone a hard lesson about respect and gratitude? How did it go? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.